The most expensive thing Carter Thompson wore that night was not his watch, not his tailored jacket, and not the quiet black car that had dropped him and his wife at the curb of Le Valmont. The most expensive thing he carried into that restaurant was his patience. And by the end of the evening, the man who mistook that patience for weakness would lose far more than a table. Carter and Nora Thompson arrived just before 7, when the city had reached that hour where office lights were still glowing above the streets, but the restaurants had already begun to turn into little theaters of status. Le Valmont sat on the ground floor of a limestone building with brass doors, narrow windows, and a name that sounded expensive before anyone even looked at the menu. Inside, candles burned low on white tablecloths. Crystal glasses stood in careful rows. A pianist played soft enough to make conversation feel private, and every server moved as if one wrong footstep might disturb the price of the room. To anyone watching from a distance, Carter and Nora looked exactly like the sort of couple Le Valmont claimed to welcome. Carter wore a charcoal suit with no loud logo, the kind made by someone who cared more about fit than attention. Nora wore a deep green dress and a pearl pendant that had belonged to her mother. They were not flashy, they were not loud. They were not trying to prove they belonged there. That, in a place like Le Valmont, was sometimes the first mistake. They had come because Nora wanted to. Carter had suggested 3 other restaurants that week, including one where the chef owed him a favor, and another where the owner would have closed the private room just for them. Nora had waved all of that away. She had passed Le Valmont for years on her way to board meetings and charity events, and she liked the old building. The warm light, the way the flowers in the window changed every few days. She had once told Carter that the place reminded her of the kind of restaurant her mother used to save magazine clippings of, back when fine dining felt like a door other people walked through. So Carter made the reservation under Nora's name. Not because he was hiding exactly, but because he had grown tired of rooms changing shape when his name entered them. He had spent too much of his life watching people become softer, faster, and more careful the moment they realized he owned companies, buildings, warehouses, hotels, and pieces of cities they only knew by skyline. He wanted one dinner where his wife was not treated like the wife of a billionaire. He wanted her to be treated like Nora. At the host stand, a young woman with nervous eyes checked the book, saw the name Thompson, and was about to reach for 2 menus. But before she could step away, a man in a fitted navy suit came from the side of the dining room with the smooth urgency of someone who believed every movement in the restaurant passed through him. His name was Gerald Whitmore, general manager of Le Valmont, and he carried himself with the careful polish of a man who had spent years learning how to make rich people feel chosen. Gerald looked first at Carter, then at Nora, then at the reservation screen. His face did not change dramatically. That was part of what made it cruel. He did not sneer. He did not raise his voice. He simply allowed the welcome to drain out of his expression, drop by drop, until what remained was a professional smile with no warmth behind it. He told them, in that soft, controlled way that makes an insult harder to challenge, that the restaurant was fully committed for the evening. Nora glanced past him, not rudely, just naturally. Beyond Gerald's shoulder were at least 6 empty tables, each set with folded napkins and untouched glassware. A two-top near the window stood beneath the flowers she had admired from the street. Another table by the side wall had not even been lit yet. The room was busy, but it was not full. Carter saw the same thing she saw. He also saw Gerald notice them seeing it. Carter explained that they had a reservation. Gerald tapped the screen with one finger and said the reservation had either been entered incorrectly or released after a missed confirmation. The words were neat. The tone was final. He did not ask whether they had received a confirmation message. He did not ask for a phone number. He did not ask whether they would like to wait. He had made his decision before he had built the excuse to hold it. Nora, who had chaired hospital boards and faced city officials who tried to talk around her, kept her voice calm. She showed Gerald the confirmation on her phone. It displayed the date, the time, the restaurant name, and the reservation for 2 under N. Thompson. Gerald looked at it, barely long enough to pretend he had considered it. Then he said the table had been promised to another party, and that Le Valmont had a certain standard to maintain for its evening service. There are phrases that do not announce their meaning directly, because they do not have to. A certain standard, the right atmosphere, our regular clientele, They sound clean enough to pass through a dining room without breaking a glass. But everyone who has ever been measured by them knows exactly what they can carry. Carter felt Nora's hand tighten around her small evening bag. She did not look embarrassed. That almost hurt him more. Embarrassment would have meant surprise. Instead, there was a tired stillness in her face, the kind he had seen before in hotel lobbies, luxury stores, private clubs, and boardrooms, where people asked whose guest she was before they asked her name. Carter had money enough to buy silence from almost any room. Nora had lived long enough to know that money did not always arrive before suspicion. Gerald leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice, as if he were doing them a favor by keeping the humiliation private. He suggested there were other restaurants nearby that might be more suitable. When Carter did not move, Gerald's politeness thinned. He said that Le Valmont was not a place for people who wandered in hoping for special treatment. He said the evening was reserved for guests who understood the culture of the establishment. And then, with the smallest tightening at the corner of his mouth, he used language that had nothing to do with reservations and everything to do with race. He did not shout it. He did not need to. He tucked the insult into a sentence as if it were a crumb brushed from his sleeve, something he expected to disappear before anyone important noticed. But Nora heard it. Carter heard it. So did a young server standing near the service station with a tray of sparkling water trembling in her hands. Her name was Shelby Adams. She was 23 years old, 3 months into the job, and still learning how to move through Le Valmont without being corrected. Gerald had already told her twice that week that her smile was too familiar, her shoes too plain, her questions too slow, and her background too casual for a restaurant that expected excellence. Shelby came from the east side of the city, where her grandmother had run a small lunch counter for 30 years before rent swallowed it whole. She had taken the job at Le Valmont because she wanted to learn fine dining from the inside, even if the inside sometimes treated her like a stain on the linen. Shelby saw what Gerald was doing. More than that, she recognized the rhythm of it. She had seen Gerald become silk for certain guests and steel for others. She had watched him invent dress code concerns for black teenagers in blazers while laughing kindly with white men in golf shirts. She had watched him move Latino families away from the windows and seat loud corporate groups wherever they wanted. It was never written down. It was never announced in staff meetings. It lived in the pauses, the glances, the way he used policy like a knife wrapped in a napkin. That evening, Shelby did not have the power to overrule him. She did not own a key. She did not manage the floor. She could not risk losing the job that helped pay her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's bus pass. But she had enough power to step forward when Gerald turned away. She carried 2 glasses of water to Carter, and Nora placed them carefully on the narrow ledge beside the host stand and told them they were welcome to sit for a moment while things were being sorted. It was a small act, almost nothing if measured by business standards. 2 glasses of water, a folded napkin, a voice that did not treat them like a problem. But in that room, at that moment, it was the only kindness offered by someone wearing the restaurant's uniform. Gerald snapped her name under his breath. Shelby straightened, but did not take the water back. Carter noticed that. Nora did too. Nora looked at the young woman with a softness that did not need a sentence around it. Carter took one of the glasses, not because he was thirsty, but because accepting it made Shelby's kindness real. He thanked her by name, after glancing at the small brass tag pinned to her vest. Shelby's shoulders eased a fraction. Gerald came back with the kind of smile people use when they are angry, but still aware of witnesses. He told Shelby to return to her section. Then he turned to Carter and Nora again and said there was nothing more to discuss. He suggested they leave before the restaurant's evening service was disrupted. Carter looked past him once more at the empty table by the window. The candle there had just been lit. For a moment, Carter said nothing. That silence made Gerald impatient. Men like Gerald were comfortable with protest because protest gave them something to manage. A raised voice could be called aggression. A demand could be called entitlement. A trembling hand could be called instability. But calm made him uneasy. Carter's calm did not fit the role Gerald had assigned him. Carter asked one simple question. He wanted to know whether the table by the window was unavailable. Gerald said it had been reserved weeks in advance for a valued guest. The lie came quickly, almost beautifully, the way a practiced lie often does. Then he looked toward the door, making it clear that he considered the conversation finished. That was when the second couple entered. They were white, flushed from the summer heat, and dressed as if they had wandered in from a beach town instead of a luxury restaurant. The man wore wrinkled shorts and a polo shirt with a faded logo. The woman had flip-flops that slapped softly against the marble floor. Neither of them looked ashamed. They looked cheerful, hungry, and slightly lost. The man told the host stand they did not have a reservation, but had heard the duck was worth trying. The young hostess froze. Shelby from across the room stopped wiping a tray. Nora's eyes moved to Gerald. Carter's did not. He already knew what was coming. The truth, when it reveals itself, does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrives wearing shorts and flip-flops, asking for a table. Gerald changed in front of them. His shoulders relaxed. His voice warmed. He welcomed the couple to Le Valmont as if they had been expected all evening. He said they were fortunate because something had just opened up. Then, with Carter and Nora still standing at the host's stand, Gerald led the couple to the table by the window, the very table he had just described as reserved weeks in advance for a valued guest. No one at that table knew they had become part of something larger. The white couple sat down gratefully, laughing about how underdressed they were. Gerald assured them it was no trouble at all. He unfolded the woman's napkin himself. He adjusted the candle. He recommended champagne. Across the dining room, two people watched with particular attention. One was Madeline Hart, a senior editor at Forbes, seated at a corner table with a notebook beside her untouched salad. She had spent the better part of a year trying to secure a full interview with Carter Thompson, whose companies had reshaped industrial real estate logistics and urban redevelopment without making him a household name. Carter was famous in certain circles for refusing to perform wealth. He bought distressed buildings without giving speeches about saving neighborhoods. He funded scholarships without attaching his name to every brochure. He avoided cameras so well that half the photographs used in business profiles were years out of date. Madeline had recognized him the moment he walked in. She had not approached because she understood the difference between journalism and intrusion. But she had watched the manager's face change, watched the reservation denial harden, watched Shelby bring the water, and watched the table by the window become available for two people who had not even asked properly. The other witness was Julian Moreau, founder of a restaurant group known across 5 states. Julian was not a celebrity chef, though television producers had tried to make him one. He had built his reputation on training kitchens where dishwashers could become line cooks and line cooks could become partners. He had eaten at Le Valmont that night because he was considering a quiet investment in its expansion. Gerald had been especially attentive to his table, sending extra courses hovering near the wine, laughing at jokes before they were finished. Julian had mistaken that attention for professionalism until he saw what Gerald did when he thought no one powerful was looking. By then, someone near the bar had begun recording. Not Carter, not Nora, not Madeline, not Julian. Just a guest, with a phone half hidden beside a cocktail, drawn in by the strange theater of a manager denying a polished black couple, while empty tables sat waiting. The phone captured Gerald's hand gestures. It captured Shelby stepping forward with water. It captured the white couple being seated at the window. It captured enough. Carter did not know about the recording yet. He did not need to. He had spent decades reading rooms. He understood how power moved through them, where it gathered, where it pretended not to be, and who paid the price when it went unchecked. He looked at Nora, and for a moment the restaurant fell away. He saw the woman who had sat beside him in a rented apartment when his first company almost collapsed. He saw the woman who had taken night classes while raising money for community clinics. He saw the woman who had buried her mother, then used part of the inheritance to start a scholarship fund because grief had made her want to open doors. She had not asked him to fight every insult. In fact, over the years, Nora had often stopped him from turning every slight into a war. She knew the cost of carrying every insult to its full conclusion. She knew that some days survival meant leaving with your dignity intact and your blood pressure unspent. But that night, as Gerald adjusted the candle for the couple at the window, Nora did not reach for Carter's arm to guide him out. She looked at the table, then at Gerald, then at her husband. Her expression was not asking for revenge. It was asking for truth. Carter stepped toward Gerald, not quickly, not loudly. Gerald saw him coming and lifted a hand, already preparing to call security without saying the word. Carter asked for the general manager's full name and the name of the person authorized to speak for the restaurant's ownership. Gerald gave a short laugh and said those details were not available to walk-in guests. Walk-in guests. That was what he called them, even with Nora's reservation confirmation still glowing on her phone. Carter nodded once, as if some final piece had settled into place. He took out his phone and called Lydia Chen, the chief operating officer of Thompson Meridian Properties. Lydia had been with him for 12 years and had once joked that Carter could identify a building by the echo in its lobby. She answered on the second ring. Carter did not raise his voice. He simply told her he was standing inside Le Valmont at the host's stand and needed the tenant file for the ground-floor restaurant at 1189 Belcourt Avenue. Gerald heard the address and went still. It was a small stillness, but Madeleine Hart saw it. Julian Moreau saw it. Shelby, standing near the service station with her tray clutched against her waist, saw it too. Carter listened for a moment, then asked Lydia to confirm the lease expiration date, the renewal option language, and the notice window. He asked whether any complaints had been logged by building staff or guests regarding discriminatory treatment at the premises. He asked her to send the relevant documents to his phone and to prepare a formal internal review for the following morning. Gerald's face lost color in a way no candlelight could flatter. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at Carter, not as an inconvenience, not as a stereotype, not as a man to be moved out of the room, but as a name beginning to attach itself to consequences. Because Gerald did not know until that moment that Carter Thompson was not just another wealthy diner. Carter Thompson owned the building. Not through a shell company Gerald would never trace, not through some distant investment fund, but through Thompson Meridian Properties, whose name sat on the tenant portal Gerald's back office used every month when rent came due. The marble under Gerald's shoes, the brass doors he liked to stand beside, the windows where he chose who could be seen and who should be hidden. All of it belonged to the man he had just tried to humiliate. The silence that followed was not loud, but it spread. It moved from the host stand to the bar, from the bar to the corner tables, from the corner tables to the servers, who suddenly found reasons to move more slowly. Gerald tried to recover. Men like him often believe recovery is just another performance. He stepped closer to Carter with a new tone, softer now, almost intimate. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said Le Valmont valued all guests. He said the reservation system could be temperamental, and staff sometimes had to make difficult decisions in real time. Carter let him speak. That was worse than interrupting him. Every word Gerald added made the earlier lie more visible. Every attempt to smooth the insult exposed the machinery beneath it. A reservation error did not explain the table by the window. A difficult decision did not explain the shift in his face when the white couple walked in. A misunderstanding did not explain the words he had chosen when he thought Carter and Nora had no one behind them. Nora stepped beside her husband, not behind him. She had been quiet for much of the exchange, but the room had not forgotten her. Gerald turned his apology toward Carter, because Carter now represented power. Nora noticed that too. So did Shelby. So did Madeleine Hart, whose pen had begun moving again. Carter asked Gerald whether he was apologizing because he had done wrong or because he had discovered who owned the building. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, then chose another polished sentence about regret. It was the wrong answer, though there may not have been a right one left. Carter told him the apology was not accepted. He did not say it cruelly. He did not spit the words. He said it with the steady finality of a door being closed by someone who had every right to close it. Then he turned to Shelby and thanked her again for the water. That gesture changed the room more than any threat could have. Gerald had been trying to pull the power back toward himself, trying to redirect attention, trying to make the story about a misunderstanding between important men. Carter's thanks moved the center of gravity to the young waitress, who had done the smallest, decent thing when decency was absent from the people in charge. Shelby looked startled, almost frightened by being seen. She glanced toward Gerald, who was staring at her as if kindness had been a form of insubordination. Carter noticed that too. He asked Shelby whether Gerald had instructed staff to refuse service in that manner before. Shelby did not answer immediately. The whole room seemed to lean toward her. She had a job to lose. That mattered. It mattered more than people with savings sometimes remember. Shelby's rent was due in 9 days. Her mother had a prescription waiting at a pharmacy that did not extend credit. Her younger brother was taking community college classes and still borrowed her laptop twice a week. Courage for people like Shelby was not a speech. It was a calculation made with real bills inside it. So Carter did not force her. He told her she did not need to answer there in front of guests, and that if she ever wanted to speak privately, Lydia Chen would make sure she was protected. He said it plainly, without turning her into a symbol. Shelby's eyes lowered to the tray in her hands. The tray had left a line across her vest. Gerald tried one more time. He offered the Thompsons a private table. Not the window table now occupied by the flip-flop couple, but something better, he insisted. He mentioned the chef's tasting menu, the reserve wine list, the owner's personal attention. He said the evening could still be salvaged. That was the moment Nora finally gave him the kind of look that made even wealthy men reconsider themselves. She had not come to Le Valmont for free wine. She had not come to be upgraded after being degraded. She had not come to become acceptable once her husband's holdings had been verified. She had come for dinner in a room she had admired, and Gerald had shown her exactly what kind of room it was. Carter and Nora left without taking the table. Outside the city, air felt warmer than it had before. The black car was still nearby, but Nora did not move toward it right away. She stood beneath the restaurant awning and looked through the window at the table where another couple now sat beneath the flowers. Carter stood beside her. For a minute, neither of them said much. The humiliation was not new, and that was part of its weight. New pain can shock a person into motion. Old pain can make the body tired. Nora eventually asked Carter whether he had known the lease was coming up. He had. The renewal packet had crossed his desk 2 weeks earlier. Le Valmont had been profitable, punctual with rent, and popular with a certain kind of client. On paper, it was an easy renewal. Carter had planned to let the team handle it. He owned too many buildings to involve himself in every tenant decision. But paper does not drink water at a host stand. Paper does not watch a wife swallow an insult. Paper does not hear a manager use policy to dress up prejudice. Carter told Nora the renewal would receive more attention now. She looked at him, and for the first time that evening, a small, weary smile touched her mouth. Not because she wanted destruction. Nora had never found joy in people losing work. She knew restaurants employed dishwashers, prep cooks, cleaners, bussers, people whose names never appeared in reviews, but whose labor held the room together. She did not want innocent workers punished for Gerald's cruelty. But she also knew that places become what they tolerate, and Le Valmont had tolerated Gerald long enough for him to become comfortable. Inside the restaurant, Gerald moved through the next hour like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. He visited important tables. He laughed too loudly. He disappeared into the office twice. He asked the hostess for the Thompson reservation record, then told her to adjust the notes. She refused, trembling, and said the system kept timestamps. He told Shelby to stop hovering near the dining room and sent her to polish glassware in the back, though there were already 2 people doing it. Shelby went, but not before she saw Madeline Hart slide a business card beneath the edge of her bread plate and gesture gently for Shelby to take it when no one was looking. Julian Moreau asked for his check before dessert. Gerald personally brought it, hoping to reset the evening with charm. Julian paid, stood, and told him that a restaurant's food could be brilliant and still leave a bitter taste if the welcome was rotten. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Gerald knew who Julian was. He also knew in that instant that the investment conversation was dead. By 10 that night, the first video appeared online. It was not perfectly filmed. The angle was crooked. A server crossed in front of the lens twice. The sound dipped whenever the piano swelled. But it showed enough. It showed Carter and Nora standing at the host stand. It showed Gerald pointing toward the door. It showed empty tables. It showed the white couple entering without a reservation. It showed Gerald leading them to the window table. It captured one of his cleaner excuses and enough of his uglier language for people to understand the rest. At first, the post moved through the city the way local outrage often does, passed between group chats, neighborhood pages, restaurant workers, and people who had stories of their own. Then, someone identified the couple as Carter and Nora Thompson. Someone else found the property records tying Thompson Meridian to the building. A former Le Valmont hostess commented that Gerald had done this before. A black attorney wrote about being told the bar was at capacity while seats sat open. A family posted that they had once been moved from the front room to a back corner after arriving for a birthday dinner. Servers, former servers, delivery drivers, and guests began adding details that had been scattered for years, each one small enough to be dismissed alone, but heavy together. By morning, the hashtag was everywhere in the city. Hashtag Le Valmont Racism appeared beneath the video, beneath screenshots of reservation confirmations, beneath old reviews. People were now reading differently. A food critic who had praised Le Valmont's sauce work 3 months earlier posted that hospitality without dignity was only performance. A local councilwoman demanded an inquiry into discriminatory business practices. The restaurant's reservation lines jammed, not with bookings, but with cancellations. Corporate clients asked to move private dinners elsewhere. A wine distributor quietly paused a promotional event. A bridal party cancelled a rehearsal dinner and said they would not celebrate love in a room that rationed respect. Gerald did not sleep. By 7 in the morning, he had called the owner of Le Valmont 6 times. The owner, Alain Bressard, had been in the Hamptons for a private tasting and woke to a phone full of messages, news links, and one clipped email from Thompson Meridian Properties requesting an urgent meeting. Alain had always considered Gerald difficult, but useful. Gerald remembered names, managed, demanding clients, and guarded the restaurant's image with almost religious intensity. Alain had ignored complaints about tone because revenue was strong. He had dismissed staff turnover because fine dining was hard. He had mistaken control for excellence, which is one of the more expensive mistakes a restaurant owner can make. At 9:30, Carter sat in a conference room 12 floors above the city with Lydia Chen, 2 attorneys, and the head of community partnerships for the Thompson Foundation. Nora sat beside him, not because she needed to, but because this had happened to both of them. On the table were the lease documents, incident reports from building security, 3 prior complaints forwarded by visitors, and a printout of the viral post. Carter read everything. He did not rush. Anger can make fast decisions feel satisfying, but Carter had built his life by understanding the difference between satisfaction and strategy. The lease could not be ripped apart overnight simply because Gerald had been cruel. Carter knew that. His attorneys knew it too. There were notice requirements, obligations, timelines, but the renewal option was discretionary, and Le Valmont's term would end in 92 days. There were also conduct provisions tied to reputational harm, discriminatory practices, and use of the premises in compliance with law. The path forward was not theatrical, but it was real. Carter instructed the team to begin a formal review and notify Le Valmont that renewal would not be offered. He also asked Lydia to identify every non-managerial employee who would be affected if the restaurant closed. He wanted names, roles, years of service, and whether Thompson Meridian could help connect them with other kitchens, hotels, or training programs. Nora added that they should include mental health support and emergency transition grants for workers who had done nothing wrong. That was Nora. Even in the middle of justified anger, she could still see the people standing near the blast radius. By noon, Le Valmont issued a public statement. It said the restaurant was saddened by the misunderstanding, committed to inclusivity, and conducting an internal review. It did not name Gerald. It did not apologize directly to Carter or Nora. It did not explain the table. The internet took the statement apart line by line. Former employees posted that the review should begin with the manager everyone had warned ownership about. Diners posted old receipts and old stories. People who had never heard of Le Valmont before that morning learned its name through disgust. Madeline Hart published a column 2 days later. It was not a gossip piece. It was sharper than that. She wrote about luxury spaces that mistake exclusivity for excellence, about the invisible sorting systems that decide who is welcomed, who is watched, who is delayed, and who is denied. She described what she had witnessed without turning Carter into a helpless victim or Gerald into a cartoon. She wrote that the most revealing part of the incident was not that Gerald refused a billionaire. It was that he thought the refusal would only matter if the man turned out to be powerful. That sentence traveled farther than the video. Julian Moreau gave an interview of his own. He said restaurants are judged not by how they treat critics, investors, or celebrities, but by how they treat people whose names they do not recognize. He announced that his group would offer interviews to any Le Valmont staff members seeking new work, except those involved in discriminatory conduct. Within days, 3 line cooks, 2 bussers, and 1 pastry assistant had accepted positions elsewhere. Gerald was fired by the end of the week. The announcement came late on a Friday afternoon, the traditional hour for businesses hoping bad news will soften over a weekend. It did not soften. People noticed that Le Valmont had protected him until protecting him became impossible. Gerald's termination letter cited violations of conduct policy, failure of leadership, and damage to the restaurant's reputation. It said nothing about the smaller moments that had led there, the little choices, the quiet exclusions, the staff he had trained to look away. For Gerald, the fall was not graceful. He tried to call Carter's office and was told all communication should go through counsel. He sent Nora a letter written in language so polished, it seemed more concerned with liability than remorse. He claimed he had been under pressure, that the restaurant had been overbooked, that he had made a poor judgment in a difficult moment. He mentioned his career. He mentioned his family. He mentioned the unfairness of being defined by one evening. Nora read the letter once and placed it back in the envelope. She did not owe him the labor of teaching him why one evening had revealed years of practice. Carter did not respond. Le Valmont tried to survive without Gerald. Alain Boissard hired a crisis firm, brought in a diversity consultant, and offered discounted tasting menus to lure back the curious. But the room had changed. The candles still burned. The glasses still shone. The duck still arrived with perfect skin. Yet every empty table seemed to remember the table Gerald had lied about. Guests who came to defend the restaurant found themselves photographed by protesters outside. Guests who came out of curiosity left uneasy. Staff moved through service with the tense politeness of people working on a ship everyone knows has taken on water. 92 days can be a short time in a crisis and a long time in a dining room. Le Valmont lost private events first, then weekday lunches collapsed, then suppliers tightened terms. Alain tried to negotiate with Thomson Meridian, offering higher rent, renovations, even a public partnership with Nora's foundation. Carter refused all of it. Not loudly, not vindictively. He simply said the decision was final. The building would not renew a tenant whose leadership had turned hospitality into humiliation. When the last night came, Le Valmont did not close with a grand farewell. There was no line around the block, no sentimental crowd, no glowing final review. A few loyal regulars came, a few reporters stood outside. The staff cleaned the kitchen, labeled what could be donated, packed knives, emptied lockers, and carried years of exhaustion into the alley behind the building. Shelby was there, but she was no longer wearing the Le Valmont uniform. After the video went viral, Shelby had given a private statement to Thomson Meridian's review team. She told the truth carefully. She did not exaggerate. She did not pretend to have been braver than she was. She described the prior incidents, the pressure to seat certain guests in certain places, and the way Gerald used words like atmosphere and fit. Her statement helped confirm a pattern, but Carter remembered something more important than her testimony. He remembered that when everyone else was measuring risk, Shelby had measured thirst. Nora invited Shelby to the foundation office 2 weeks after Gerald was fired. Shelby arrived in a clean blouse and the same practical shoes Gerald had once criticized. She expected paperwork, maybe a witness follow-up, maybe a small thank you. Instead, Nora asked her what she had wanted before Le Valmont taught her to keep her head down. Shelby did not answer quickly. Dreams can become embarrassing when life has pressed them flat. She eventually admitted that she wanted to cook, not just serve, not just memorize wine pairings and smile through insults. She wanted to study pastry sauces, kitchen management, the full language of food. Her grandmother's lunch counter had been the first place she learned that a meal could make a person feel less alone. But culinary school cost more than her family could carry, and every year she delayed made the dream feel more childish. Nora listened. Carter, sitting quietly near the window, did not interrupt. When Shelby finished, Nora placed a folder on the table. Inside was a full scholarship offer through the Thompson Foundation, covering tuition, books, tools, uniforms, transportation, and a living stipend, modest enough to keep the focus on study, but real enough to keep Shelby from choosing between rent and class. There was also a mentorship placement with Julian Moreau's restaurant group, if Shelby wanted it. Shelby cried before she could stop herself. Then she apologized for crying, which made Nora shake her head gently. There are rooms where tears are treated like a loss of control. Nora had spent years building rooms where they were allowed to be evidence that a person had been carrying too much alone. Carter told Shelby the scholarship was not payment for being kind to him. It was an investment in what she had already shown. She had noticed dignity when the person in charge ignored it. She had acted within the narrow space available to her. That kind of instinct mattered in hospitality more than any polished accent or perfect cork presentation. Shelby began culinary school that fall. The first weeks were harder than she expected. She burned caramel twice. She cut her thumb on a mandolin and pretended it did not hurt until an instructor made her sit down. She struggled with French terminology that Gerald had once thrown around as if pronunciation were proof of worth. Some classmates had grown up traveling, eating in restaurants Shelby had only read about. They knew the names of chefs' regions, techniques, and wines. Shelby knew how to stretch soup for 5 people when there was only enough chicken for 3. At first, she thought that made her behind. Then one instructor watched her rescue a broken sauce with patience and a splash of warm water, and told her she had hands that listened. Another noticed that she remembered who in the class had allergies, who skipped breakfast, who needed encouragement without embarrassment. Shelby slowly understood that hospitality had not begun at Le Valmont. It had begun at her grandmother's counter, with chipped mugs, vinyl stools, and people who came in hungry for more than food. Meanwhile, Carter and Nora faced their own question: what should happen to the old space? They received offers quickly. Luxury retailers wanted it. A private club wanted it. A national restaurant group proposed a new concept with imported marble and a celebrity chef attached. The numbers were good. Some were better than good. Lydia Chen presented the options because that was her job, but she knew Carter's face well enough to recognize when profit had already lost the argument. Nora walked the empty restaurant one afternoon after the last fixtures had been removed. Without tables, Le Valmont looked smaller. The marks on the floor showed where chairs had dragged back for years. The wall near the service station was scuffed from trays. In the kitchen, the air still held a faint ghost of butter and steel. Nora stood near the window table, the famous one, the one Gerald had claimed was reserved. Sunlight fell across the bare floor where the candle used to sit. She told Carter she did not want the room to become another place that taught people to feel lucky if they were allowed inside. Carter asked what she wanted instead. Nora looked toward the kitchen and said she wanted a place where people learned to open doors. That was how the Thompson Community Kitchen began. It did not happen overnight. Real repair rarely does. Architects had to redraw the space. Permits had to be filed. Old luxury finishes had to be removed or repurposed. The dining room became a teaching hall with long work tables and durable stools. The private wine room became a pantry. The host stand, where Gerald had stood like a gatekeeper, was taken out completely. In its place, Nora insisted on a wide entrance with no podium, no barrier, just a reception table where volunteers could greet people by name. The kitchen was rebuilt for training. There were induction ranges, prep stations, commercial ovens, dishwashing areas, and a small classroom for lessons on budgeting, nutrition, food safety, and restaurant finances. Carter funded the renovation through the foundation, but Nora shaped the soul of it. The program would offer free culinary training to people facing barriers to employment, young adults aging out of foster care, single parents, formerly incarcerated people, immigrants with cooking skills but no local credentials, veterans, and workers who had been kept at the bottom of kitchens with no path upward. It would also serve meals 3 nights a week to seniors' families and anyone who needed dinner without explanation. Nora was firm on that part. No humiliating forms at the door. No questions designed to make hunger prove itself. People could give a name or not. They could sit near the window or in the middle of the room. They could ask for water and receive it before anyone asked what they could afford. The opening day drew reporters because the story had become famous, but Carter kept his remarks short. He thanked the workers, the instructors, the neighborhood partners, and the former restaurant employees who had helped design the program. He did not mention Gerald by name. He did not need to. The room itself had become the answer. Shelby attended the opening in her culinary school jacket. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the place where she had once been scolded for bringing water to two people who were being insulted. Now there were pitchers of water on every table. Children reached for rolls. An older man in a brown coat asked if seconds were allowed, and a volunteer told him he could have as much as he wanted. A woman who had once washed dishes at Le Valmont now taught knife skills in the training kitchen. The old window table was gone, replaced by a long communal table where strangers sat shoulder to shoulder. Nora found Shelby near the entrance and squeezed her hand. Carter asked about school. Shelby told him she was tired all the time, which made him laugh softly, because it was the first honest answer she had given him without trying to sound grateful. Gratitude can become another performance when people feel indebted. Carter did not want that from her. He wanted her to grow strong enough to stop apologizing for needing help. Years passed, not in the clean, easy way stories sometimes pretend, but in the uneven way real years do. Shelby graduated near the top of her class, though not without failures. She failed one practical exam because her timing collapsed under pressure. She worked double shifts during a winter break and nearly quit when her mother's health worsened. She learned to accept help, then learned the harder skill of asking for it before she broke. Julien Moreau placed her in one of his kitchens, where she started at the bottom and earned each step. She learned inventory, payroll, supplier, negotiations, menu costing, staff, conflict, and the quiet art of noticing who was about to burn out. She also kept returning to the Thompson Community Kitchen. At first, she volunteered on Mondays. Then she taught pastry basics once a month. Then she helped design a small business module for graduates who wanted to open food carts, catering services, bakeries, or cafes. She told students the truth. Cooking was romance from a distance and discipline up close. A restaurant could be a dream, but it could also eat your life if you did not know your numbers, your boundaries, and your worth. Carter aged into a little more silver at the temples. Nora's foundation grew, though she still treated every new program like a promise that had to be kept after the cameras left. The Thompson Community Kitchen placed hundreds of graduates in jobs, but the number Carter cared about most was not the one in the annual report. It was the number of people who came back to teach. People who had once arrived hungry, ashamed, or unsure returned wearing aprons with their names stitched on the front. They stood where Le Valmont staff had once been trained to sort guests by value, and they taught others how to feed a room without humiliating anyone inside it. As for Gerald, his name faded from the headlines faster than he expected and slower than he wanted. He found consulting work briefly, then lost it when clients searched his name. He complained for a while that one mistake had ruined him, but the people who had worked under him knew it had not been one mistake. It had been a habit. One evening had simply placed the habit under enough light for others to see it. Whether he ever truly understood that is not the center of this story. Some people only regret the cost of their behavior, not the behavior itself. The center of the story is what happened to the space after the lie collapsed. 7 years after that night at Le Valmont, Shelby opened her own restaurant. It was not grand in the old way. There were no chandeliers, no velvet ropes, no host stand designed like a checkpoint. She found a narrow corner building in a neighborhood where the bus stop was always crowded, and the bakery next door opened before dawn. She painted the walls a soft blue because her grandmother had loved blue coffee cups. She bought sturdy wooden tables, not too precious to be scratched. She hired 2 graduates from the Thompson Community Kitchen and 1 former dishwasher from Le Valmont who had become a prep cook after Julien Moreau gave him a chance. Shelby named the restaurant Ada's Table after her grandmother. The night before opening, she stood alone in the dining room with the lights low and a stack of folded napkins in front of her. Her hands knew how to fold them now, clean and sharp, but she did not make them too perfect. Perfect rooms had once made her nervous. She wanted this room to breathe. On opening night, Carter and Nora came without announcement. No photographers, no entourage. Carter wore a simple dark jacket. Nora wore the same pearl pendant she had worn the night Le Valmont turned them away. Shelby saw them from across the room and stopped so suddenly that one of her servers nearly walked into her. For a second, she was 23 again, holding 2 glasses of water under Gerald's glare. Then she was herself, the owner, the chef, the woman who had survived the long road between kindness and calling. She seated Carter and Nora near the front window, not because they were important, though they were. Not because anyone needed to see them there, though people eventually noticed. She seated them there because the table had good light, enough room, and a view of the room she had built. Before handing them menus, Shelby poured 2 glasses of water herself. She placed them down carefully, the way she had years before. But this time, her hands did not tremble. Carter looked at the water, then at Shelby, and something passed between them that did not need to become a speech. Nora touched the rim of her glass and smiled. Around them, the restaurant filled with sound, chairs shifting, forks being placed, a child asking too many questions, a cook calling for herbs. The low, steady hum of people arriving without fear that the room would measure them before feeding them. Ada's table was not perfect. No restaurant is. A ticket printer jammed during the first rush. One sauce needed more salt. A server forgot table numbers and had to laugh his way through it. Shelby burned 1 tray of rolls because she stopped too long at Carter and Nora's table. But nobody left hungry, and nobody left wondering whether they had been allowed inside by mistake. Near the end of the night, an older black couple came in without a reservation. They were dressed simply, and the man looked worried when he saw how full the room was. Shelby noticed the hesitation before anyone else did. She walked to the door herself, welcomed them, and found 2 seats at the communal table until a smaller one opened. She did not know who they were. She did not need to know. That was the point. Years earlier, Gerald had looked at Carter and Nora Thompson and seen only what his prejudice allowed him to see. He saw inconvenience where there was dignity. He saw threat where there was grace. He saw people he could refuse because he believed power would not answer. But power did answer, not only by closing a restaurant and not only by ending a lease. It answered by changing what the room was for. The table Gerald said was reserved became a story. The room he tried to guard became a kitchen. The young waitress he tried to silence became a chef. And the glass of water he treated like disobedience became, in its own quiet way, the beginning of everything that followed. So when people tell this story, it is easy to focus on the dramatic part. The billionaire who owned the building, the manager who went pale, the hashtag that spread across the city, the famous restaurant that closed its doors. Those details matter. They are satisfying because consequences matter. But the deeper truth is smaller and harder to forget. A room reveals itself by what it does when it thinks no one important is watching. Gerald thought he was deciding who deserved a table. He was really showing the world who he was. Shelby thought she was only bringing water. She was really choosing the kind of person she intended to become. Carter and Nora thought they were going out for dinner. They were really walking into a moment that would test whether dignity could be defended without becoming cruelty in return. And maybe that is why the story stayed with so many people. Because almost everyone knows what it feels like to stand at some invisible doorway, waiting for someone else to decide whether they belong. Almost everyone has seen a rule bend for one person and harden for another. Almost everyone has watched kindness arrive from the least powerful person in the room. The next time you enter a place with polished floors, white tablecloths, expensive lighting, or any other costume of importance, remember that welcome is not proven by beauty, it is proven by behavior. It is proven in the first glass of water, the honest answer the chair offered without suspicion, the name spoken with respect before anyone checks a bank account, a title, or a connection. Because sometimes the person being turned away owns the building, sometimes